This engine started life as a precision scale, O-scale C&O J3 Greenbrier. It was originally done in the as-built configuration with the headlight in the middle of the smoke box front and lagging on the sides of the firebox. The owner, Jim Williams, wanted something a little more unique, and he wanted it updated to the way they were modified later in life, with the headlight moved down onto the pilot deck and the lagging removed from the sides of the firebox. Jim, the owner, actually did most of the front end detailing himself. He did a very nice job of moving the headlight down onto the pilot. He had to scratch build the little platform and bracket that holds the Pile National headlight there, and then put the number plate in the middle of the smoke box front. He also replaced the original Walschaerts valve gear with Baker valve gear, which the C&O had done later on, and did some other plumbing around the front end of the engine before he sent it to me for final modifications. As we move back along the side of the engine, we get to the parts that I replaced. Most of the piping along both sides had to be replaced, and then those unlagged smoke box sides had to be fabricated out of some 900 scale hardware rivets, and the very largest stay bolts had to be actually turned on a lathe. Coming back here to the sand dome, we're going to take a closer up look at that. As we take a good close-up look at the sand dome, notice these very small air lines that go to each of the sander valves. Those had to be added, and the little U-joints or the unions on them had to be added as well. So these are the air lines that actually control the sander valves. These are the sander valves. All these sander lines were replaced, and then these were added for additional detailing. Also on the sand dome, all these were just little dimples pressed into the brass of the sand dome, but now they're actual little simulated hex nuts on studs from scale hardware. Moving down from the sand dome, I'd like to point out the sander lines themselves. Here's one you can see that runs clear down to the brake hanger, and these others run on down here to the brake hangers themselves. All of these sander lines were replaced. Originally they just kind of wrapped around under the boiler, but now they actually go down where they're supposed to. This back one here goes all the way down and back behind the brake hanger, behind the water pump here. The water pump plumbing all had to be changed as well. In this view, I've lined up a flashlight behind one of the drivers to demonstrate that the axles on this model have actually been made hollow. So the light actually goes straight on through. You can see as I move the flashlight, the light shines through or doesn't shine through depending on alignment. The axles were made out of thick-walled stainless tubing, and they represent the way most modern steam engine axles were made, being hollowed out in order to reduce weight. The firebox sides were completely removed, along with all the piping that ran over the firebox sides, because you couldn't remove the firebox sides without removing the piping. Then I had to completely fabricate all these brand new sides here, the graphite colored portion, and all of these rivets, some 900 or so rivets and stay bolts. You've got afterwards piping added in here. You have the control rods for the blowdown valves. You have the overfire jet plumbing. You have this small pipe that runs from the cold water pipe, from the cold water pump, up and back into the cab to supply water into the cab for spraying it down, getting rid of coal dust and things like that. This particular blowdown pipe actually goes up to the top of the boiler to the centrifugal blowdown separator up there. Notice also that there is a flexible rubber hose right here. You can see how it flexes as the trailing truck moves. The water line from the tender is actually hard plumb to the trailing truck, so you have to have a flexible hose right here to the cold water pump. This is that pipe that came up from the blowdown, and it goes over here to the centrifugal blowdown separator behind the generator. Then we have on top of the cab the screens, the anti-cinder screens that were installed over the hatches later on. I guess the crew got too many cinders in their eyes, so they had to put these screens over. Now this is actual fine brass screening right here, and the hatches can still slide under that, as you can see. They're built and mounted exactly to the C&O specifications. You have simulated hex nuts on studs up here on the top edge where the two screens join each other, and then all around the periphery you have simulated hex bolts. That's the way that the C&O actually mounted those things. There's some interesting detail around the lower portion of the cab. If you look right here, you see the big steam pipe that goes down to the booster engine on the trailing truck. Now this pipe actually pivots along with the trailing truck. If I push the trailing truck like this, you can see that pipe move. And when I pull the trailing truck back out like that, you can see that that pipe is actually attached to the trailing truck and pivots along with it. These universal joint castings are made as a kit by Precision Scale. Of course, you also have the water lines connected here to the pipe that goes alongside the trailing truck. Back underneath here, you'll notice that there's a prototype double drawbar instead of the usual clunky looking drawbar that most importers put on. This one is scale dimensions, and it's a 2 drawbar arrangement just like the real thing. By looking in the back of the cab with the cab lights on, you can actually see some of the gauges and backhead detail. The engine has complete backhead detail and a complete cab interior of all kinds. You can see the gauges, and they look just like real gauge faces because they're copied off of real gauge faces and made into decals. The light on the front of the bunker is actually operational. There, you can see that come on. And the other little light at the other end of the bunker also comes on. So those are independently controllable with the DCC controls. The rear end beam of the tender also needed some additional detailing. These large chains, safety chains on both sides, were added by Jim before I got the engine. I added these flexible air hoses here and the correct passenger steam line. Precision Scale has never done a correct passenger steam line. This is the way it really should look. Up here we have the characteristic cut lever that C&O like to use. They're actually shaped flat bars rather than rods. So they're shaped like this to hook into a loop on the cut bar, And then these, as the cut lever is pulled up, pull the lift pin out of the coupler. Unfortunately, accurate Chesapeake and Ohio steam engine decals seem to be awfully hard to come by, so I had to custom make these decals as well. They're very difficult to apply, being about 3 different layers, but at least they are the correct size, the correct length, and so on. The ones on the cab you can see there, as well as the ones on the side of the tender, and of course the ones on the rear of the tender. I'm now going to back the engine out of the siding and take it down to the roundhouse and turn it around so that we can look at the other side of it. But first we have to shift it from forward into reverse. You'll hear the sound of the power reverse shifting right now. That's it. And then I'm going to arm the cylinder cocks, because it's been sitting here for quite a while, so that when it starts up, what you're going to hear, instead of just a normal chuff chuff, you're going to hear a whoosh whoosh of the cylinder cocks. That's the sound of it, and now we're going to take off. Okay, we've caught up with the Greenbrier in the engine terminal now, and it's about to back down the lead to the turntable and get turned so we can examine the other side of it in detail. Having been turned, the 484 is backing back down the engine lead, and we'll head back to that viewing spot so we can examine the other side of it. On the right side, or engineer's side of the engine, are several things interesting here around the cab area. Of course, it also has the movable pipes to the trailing truck, as on the other side, this one happens to be the exhaust line from the booster engine. Right here is the injector. Now, there was no injector on the original model, and it took quite some time to psych out what this was. What it turns out to be is a standard Nathan large non-lifting injector, but it's been turned 90 degrees vertically and 90 degrees horizontally so that it's lying on its side. This is the pipe that will ordinarily come out of the bottom and go up to the check valve. It does go up to the check valve, but of course in this case it's coming out of the top. The overflow valve has been turned 90 degrees, so it still points down, and you have the overflow spreader. All of this here was non-existent. I had to do all the plumbing for that and figure out how it actually ran. Here we have flexible hose for the water line to the tender, And over here I replaced the rather tiny pathetic chain on safety chains right here with the big heavy duty chain that it should have. Here again, the entire firebox side was cut away and rebuilt entirely with all these hundreds of rivets, various sizes from Scale Hardware. The large stay bolts, the ones right along here, there and up there, and also along the front of the corners, those all had to be turned individually because nobody makes that size of a casting of any kind. Again, we have the right here the overfire jets here, and back here, and the plumbing that goes to them. This is the blowdown control rod right here, another control rod for the blowdown. This particular blowdown here, the front one, now goes up under the running board and makes its way up to the centrifugal blowdown spreader on top that way. All of the piping along the sides of the firebox and under the running board, all of this piping here had to be redone and these steps rebuilt in order to fit the new firebox sides. Everything running under the running board had to be redone. Jim had already added this centrifugal blowdown spreader drain here and the spreader on the end of it. So all I had to do was reinstall that. Here's a good look at the front of the engine, some of the things that Jim had done previously. Of course, the Baker valve gear had been done previously, and that was a great job. He also did this unique double lubricator arrangement, and this actually works. It's pivoted off of this rod so that these actually go back and forth this way as the engine runs. You'll see that later on while I run the engine. Over here, of course, you can see the sander lines come down through the running board and work their way down towards the fronts of the drivers in all cases. Looking at the front of the engine, we can see a few other things. For instance, when you turn the headlights on and off, the number board also comes on and off. The underside of the headlight here, you'll see the underside of the visor is painted white. The C&O did that, I guess, to get a little better reflected light. The class lights also go on and off with their own separate control, independent from the headlight. You've already gotten to hear how the engine sounds taking off with the cylinder cocks open. Now, when it hasn't been sitting so long and the cylinder cocks don't have to be opened and the engineer's really pulling back on the throttle, you get an entirely different sound. So we'll treat you to that, but first we have to whistle off with the actual C&O 6-chime whistle. Now that we've examined the engine in some detail, we'll hook it onto a passenger train and take it around the layout, photograph it at some of my favorite locations so you can see how it actually operates and how good it looks pulling a passenger train. Since I have no C&O cars, we're obviously going to have to use Santa Fe cars. But that's okay, at least they're stainless steel. This is one of my favorite locations to listen to a train start that's sound equipped, especially with as nice a sound as this one. It's a QSI Titan, and it really barks, and the area in front of this tunnel portal allows the sound to ricochet back and forth, and then the tunnel really amplifies it. So here we go. We'll get another quick shot of the engine running back white now. And that's the end.